certainly he's getting a lot of negative coverage in the national press at the moment, and as I said earlier, it's going to take a big few results in the next couple of weeks to turn this around.
Right. We've got to move on. Simon Hampton, freelance journalist in New York, will keep a close eye on the US politics this year. So thank you very much for your time there. It's 5 away from 5, the panel RNZ National. Now to this. Actually, there's a couple more feedback here. I met Princess Diana at Milford Primary School. It was raining and she shook our hands and apologised for us getting wet. I didn't get to reply because next minute we were swarmed by paparazzi and we were pushed to the back. All right, down to this. An opinion piece by Jane Bowron caught my eye about overly loud music in bars and cafes. And the writer talks of a lovely sunny afternoon at a gorgeous bar on Banks Peninsula. We entered the bar and found that our entourage was seated in an enclosed, small, semi-alfresco area. Unfortunately, a lone guitarist who had set up camp a couple of metres away had his amp turned up to high volume. This made conversation challenging, to say the least. And add to their misery, he was joined by not one, but 2 bongo drummers. Thank you, Mark. Pounding away hell for leather. How we longed for the guitarist to take a break, to rest our poor ears from the assault and give us the chance to speak at a civilised level. I'm all for live music in bars, but not if it intrudes upon patrons wanting to talk. Ruth Money, what do you think?
Have we not all been there?
Oh,
We have all been there, right?
that's why I've picked the article, because I have
been there. They just don't get it.
I've been next to that guitarist.
I think everybody's been next to that guitarist. Look, I think it's a bit precious to moan and complain about it, and I have called myself out for doing so. But you do feel like they need to read the room, and if the room is kind of leaning in or moving away from that amp and that noise, you need to read the room.
This is bongophobia. I'm calling it out right now,
You're
Jane.
the one that was bongoing.
Bongophobia. Because how do we know the rest of the people there weren't getting into the music? Because the first thing you think, if you think the music is too loud, go somewhere else.
Well, the thing is that they were outside dining al fresco, and so was he, so they couldn't really sort of go at...
No, go to another... If you think the music's too loud at
there's
this
not that
place...
many places to go.
Yeah,
I mean, this comes back to what we're talking about before a bit, isn't it? This is our sort of the grumpiness, you know? Jane is a lovely observant eye. I mean, it's just fantastic. But, you know, the interesting thing was, she said they went to them and said, can they turn down the music? And they said, no.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's why I have the problem.
Because
read the room.
There's a sense of some performers think, and I've been a guitarist in these sorts of situations as well. There's a sense of you wanting to perform and forgetting you're there to provide accompaniment to those that are eating and having a glass of wine.
So if you're playing, Wallace, public, I mean, do you read the room? Is that something you're conscious of?
Absolutely. When I used to sort of play in pubs with my guitar, eateries, very conscious that I was very much going to be background. It wasn't a performance, you know, so it was very soft.
Let me guess. Feelings? Was that one of your signature tunes?
No. Go Wallace.
Mark, no, not at all. No, a bit of Al Jarreau perhaps.
You didn't have any bongos.
Yeah.
No bongos.
Well, that's the thing, no bongos, because bongos carry.
Yeah.
I wonder too, they're sitting outside, the people inside are hearing the level of the music that's coming into the restaurant and think, oh no, that's not too bad. Go away, you moaning minis, you know. And, you know.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Well, we have Ruth Money and Mark Sainsbury. Thank you very much for your discussion this afternoon on the panel. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow from 3:45.
Do you want to ride home in the Lincoln, Ruth?
I'd love it.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. Who beat a 4-year-old Flexmere boy within an inch of his life, and why won't anyone say who did it? Almost 40 more people on the ill-fated Diamond Princess docked in Yokohama have coronavirus. Will the other passengers still be allowed to leave the cruise ship when the quarantine ends next week? We talked to a scientist who's hopeful an Ebola drug will work in the battle against the virus. And the countdown is on to Winston Peters' promised tell-all Facebook Live on the New Zealand First Foundation. Get your questions in quick, he says. Well, we've got a few. And has RNZ done a complete U-turn after hitting a sour note with its plans for Concert FM?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. Health officials may force people who have returned from China since the coronavirus outbreak to isolate themselves. Nearly 2,000 people are registered as being in self-imposed quarantine. It will take another 48 hours to contact the 4,000 people who have not registered since arriving from China. Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield told a media conference this afternoon he would be surprised if people are not aware of the register.
If people are not taking the opportunity and the advice and the expectation, they will self-isolate. And let me be clear, and I've said this before, our experience is people understand the importance of that. But if they're not, then we would be asking who those people were from Healthline and following them up and seeing if we needed to take any further action.
Dr Bloomfield says 50 people have been tested in New Zealand for the coronavirus and all have come back negative. The Mayor of Gore is gutted a deal to remove almost 10 tonnes of potentially hazardous dross from nearby Matoda has fallen through. The waste product from the TY Point aluminium smelter can produce ammonia gas when mixed with water. The product is sitting in a former paper mill on the banks of the Matoda River and came under threat during extreme flooding in Southland last week. The Gore District Council says it reached a deal with New Zealand aluminium smelters last week to remove the dross, but Rio Tinto bosses in Australia have reneged. Tracy Hicks says Rio Tinto needs to front up.
I'm gutted. I really thought that we had made some progress here, and the local government, family in Southland and one or two others have really bent over backwards to work with Rio to get this off the ground. And essentially we're dealing with a problem that is of their making.
The Gore Mayor, Tracy Hicks. The Ministry for Children says the injuries suffered by a 4-year-old boy in Flexmere near Hastings are extremely disturbing, but it won't discuss the case. The boy suffered severe injuries and brain damage 2 weeks ago while staying with extended family, and the police are pleading with family members to explain what happened. Anusha Bradley reports.
Oranga Tamariki says it cannot comment while the police are investigating, but its East Coast Regional Manager Te Pare Meihana says the agency is continuing to work with the whānau to offer support and are working with other professionals in the Hawke's Bay. The police say there were other children in the house at the time who have been removed while the investigation continues. Meanwhile, Flexmere residents say they are heartbroken and are holding a karakia for the boy at Flexmere Park tonight at 7 o'clock. Ko Anusha Bradley aho.
Radio New Zealand has withdrawn a proposal to restructure RNZ Concert. Last week, RNZ announced a proposal to remove Concert from its FM frequencies and automate it and use the FM frequency for a new youth station. The Chief Executive, Paul Thompson, says he met with staff in the music department this afternoon to withdraw the proposal. He says things have changed, with the government now indicating it will support the youth music service. The Tauranga Mayor says locals are angry and scared after 2 men were found dead at a house in a rural area near the popular McLaren Falls. A homicide investigation has been launched, but the police won't say whether the incident is gang-related. The Mayor, Tenby Powell, says he's been getting regular updates from the police, but he also has been getting a lot of messages from concerned locals.
This is very disturbing to all of us. I'm drowning in messages of all sorts, texts, Facebook messages from deeply concerned residents who, if I can use 2 words really to capture the essence of their communiques, one is fear and the other is anger.
The Tauranga Mayor, Tenby Powell. A scrub fire in Christchurch's eastern suburbs has been contained thanks to 2 helicopters with monsoon buckets. The blaze by the Heathcote River jumped the river in gusty winds and forced the closure of the main highway to the suburb of Littleton. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Blacks' first 5 Beauden Barrett is set to make his debut for the Blues in a month's time against the South African side, the Lions, in Auckland. Barrett was at Blues training today to meet several of his new teammates after his shift from the Hurricanes. Barrett has been taking an extended break after the World Cup, but assistant coach Tom Coventry says he's turned up in good shape.
He's down to play probably around 7, something like that. That's what we've got planned. So he's got to get himself through a couple of club games and some return to play protocol, which we're pretty hard on. So we just, as long as he can tick those boxes and make sure that he feels comfortable stepping back into Super Rugby and being the best he can be, then we'll be fine.
Blues assistant coach Tom Coventry. Scott McLaughlin's first day of Indy Car Series testing at Circuit of the Americas in Texas was largely a non-event for the two-time Supercars champion. Wet weather brought testing to an end early, with McLaughlin completing just a couple of slow laps for Team Penske. And he told motorsport website Speed Cafe he felt like it was Christmas Day, but he wasn't allowed to open his presents. There will be another day of testing tomorrow, and McLaughlin is scheduled to compete in the IndyCar Grand Prix in Indianapolis in May. That's the news.
Defending National's ad campaign.
You say all like there's a sinister thing going in relation to the National Party. There simply isn't. We are getting out what we believe.
Farewell from a former speaker.
26 years, I never intended to be a lifer in this place. I think I've given more than enough.
And Donald Trump says, bring it on.
A lot of Republicans will vote for the weakest candidate possible of the Democrats. My only problem is I'm trying to figure out who is their weakest candidate. I think they're all weak.
Ready for the day. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough. Mainly fine weather, areas of cloud overnight and tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland cloudy periods, a few showers in Westland tomorrow. Canterbury mainly fine, high cloud increasing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow, mainly fine during the afternoon about the ranges. Otago, Southland and Fiordland fine at first, cloudy periods about the south coast. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight, scattered falls spreading to Southland and Clutha. Easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning, then clearing in the evening, but areas of cloud will remain. Chatham Islands cloudy periods, a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The owner of a Flexmere property where a 4-year-old boy suffered critical injuries says he rented the Ramsey Crescent property about a year ago to a woman and 3 young children, but had no idea it was at the centre of a police investigation until contacted by Checkpoint today. Detective Inspector Mike Foster told Checkpoint yesterday the boy's injuries, which occurred on January 29th, were some of the most severe he had seen in 30 years of policing. The landlord told Checkpoint he lives in another city and the house was managed by a local property management company. He told our producer Bridget Burke he visited very recently, and on that occasion there was also a man at the house.
They were having a hot water cylinder changed and we said we wanted the old cylinder, so we went to collect it, that's all.
And everything looked okay when you went to collect the hot water cylinder?
Yep, nothing seemed out of the ordinary.
Section was kept tidy and the house looked in good repair?
Yep.
Have you had any complaints about any behaviour there or any reports of disruption?
No, none at all.
The landlord says the tenants were good people who always paid their rent on time. Flexmere residents say they're shocked and devastated that a young child has been seriously injured and brain damaged in a beating at unknown hands 2 weeks ago. They're urging those who have information about the incident to come forward and for struggling whānau to reach out if they need help so something like this doesn't happen again. Anusha Bradley reports from Flexmere.
Children's toys litter the lawn and a pile of kids' bikes sit on the deck outside the Ramsey Crescent house where the boy was staying when he was severely assaulted 2 weeks ago. There's a handwritten sign on the front door telling visitors that smoking isn't permitted inside or around their tamariki, and when RNZ shows up, a man inside the house makes it clear we aren't welcome. Immediate neighbours say the family kept to themselves or decline to comment. A short drive from Ramsey Crescent is Flexmere Park, which is full of children and parents, and the local coffee cart right outside, the Kapai Kapawaka, is humming. But the news that such a young child was so badly hurt that part of his brain is now dead has left many here reeling. Fighting back the tears, community worker Lindsay Abbott says she is absolutely gutted.
It really, really has broken my heart. So we as a whānau, as One Voice Community Services and Paharakeke wide, Hawke's Bay wide, we are all coming together tonight at the Flexmere Park at 7 o'clock, and we're going to be having a big karakia for this boy and to all our babies that are silently suffering at the hands of those that are meant to love and protect them.
Local kaumātua Nani Moewaka, who has lived in Pāharakeke for more than 50 years, is distraught by the news. She's calling for Oranga Tamariki to step up, as well as whānau to speak out if they're struggling.
How devastating it is for the whole lot of us here in Pāharakeke. Look at it. Today, Flexmere is classed, Pāharakeke is classed as not the better place to be at. I don't blame people to think like that because what's happening inside. People, if you're listening to me out there, listen to me. Stop doing what you're doing. Come to talk to us. Come and go and seek help if you can't handle the baby. Please, that little baby has no voice.
The police say the 4-year-old boy had recently been returned to the care of his immediate family after being cared for by extended whānau. Detective Inspector Mike Foster, who's leading the investigation, says at least 5 different people were in the property the day he was injured, but not all are cooperating with police. That's something these Flexmere residents say is unacceptable.
Richard, that the parents or the people that was around them ain't saying anything. Yeah, that's pretty sad. Oh, that was wicked. It was pretty sad.
They've got to hand themselves in. At the end of the day, they're gutless.
The police say there were other children in the house at the time who've been removed while the investigation continues. Oranga Tamariki says it can't comment on the case while the investigation's underway, but its East Coast Regional Manager, Te Pare Meihana, describes the boy's injuries as extremely disturbing. She says they're continuing to work with whānau to offer support and are working with other professionals in Hawke's Bay. A karakia for the boy will be held at Flexmere Park at 7 o'clock tonight. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Plans to scale back RNZ Concert appear to have been completely scrapped, with management telling staff that they're going back to the drawing board. CEO Paul Thompson today told affected staff that plans to axe their jobs and automate the station had been shelved following a public outcry and government intervention. The chair of RNZ's board, Jim Mather, has declined Checkpoint's requests for an interview, saying he will be in meetings over the next 2 days. He directed us back to CEO Paul Thompson, despite a number of our questions relating to governance issues that are the purview of the board. Mr Thompson has not responded directly to our request for an interview today. We also submitted a list of questions. As yet, we have not received any answers. But earlier today, a 26,000 signature petition was delivered to their offices, calling for a halt to the proposed staff redundancies. Music teacher Margaret Goldberg and music writer Elizabeth Kerr delivered the petition. They told our reporter Logan Church they had planned to meet with Paul Thompson, but that was cancelled at the last minute.
This campaign to support Concert has been an absolutely grassroots campaign. There's been no PR company driving this. This has been done by people who are passionate about this network.
So you've got a petition in your hands. How many people have signed and what are they asking for?
26,251. And our petition was to keep it on FM, which they announced they're doing, and they thought that was enough. But as I was telling Elizabeth, it's like they took our cake away and then they gave us crumbs back, because Concert FM needs to keep its presenters, and that is what this petition was originating for. Keep the presenters, keep all the staff at Concert FM, because they are what make it Concert FM. You can't just have a playlist.
At the moment, I think there are 17 or 18 people who deliver radio 24/7 from Radio New Zealand Concert. And that is a tiny team in international terms, and it's a tiny budget in international terms. But in fact, that group are essential, and almost all of them under this proposal are facing redundancy, which means we won't have some very brilliant people who've worked in radio and worked in classical music for decades delivering what that network has been delivering.
So you had planned to meet with the RNZ Chief Executive, Paul Thompson, but that's not happening anymore, is it? What happened there?
Well, we tried yesterday. We've been back and forth with his personal assistant, and first it was no, then it was maybe, then it was yes, and then, oh, the media will be there. No. So I think the less attention he gets, the better is what it seems to be.
We're very, very disappointed because we think 26,000 people signed this petition in good faith. It's addressed to him. We think that he could give them the courtesy of 5 minutes of his time to receive the petition from us, and it's extremely disappointing that when he heard there may be some media interest in this, and of course there's great public interest in this. He's running a public media organisation owned by New Zealanders, and we believe it's his duty to front and receive the petition, but in fact he's not prepared to do that.
So what's the plan now?
We're going to deliver to the reception and see what happens there.
And that was Margaret Goldberg and Elizabeth Kerr speaking to our reporter Logan Church. Now, RNZ says the chief executive couldn't meet with them as he was in an important briefing with RNZ music staff. The petition was instead received by another senior staff member. Again, we invited the Broadcasting Minister, Chris Farfoy, and Associate Minister of the Arts, Grant Robertson, on the programme this evening. Both of them declined. It is almost 16 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme so far this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters is teasing a tell-all on the secretive New Zealand First Foundation on his Facebook page tonight to set the record straight on what he says are the latest hysterics. RNZ has revealed the foundation has been receiving tens of thousands of dollars from donors in the industry in payments which fall just below the $15,000 threshold, at which point party donations are usually made public. The same foundation is facing the spotlight of the Serious Fraud Office after the Electoral Commission referred its inquiries to the police, who promptly passed those inquiries on to the SFO. Here's our political reporter, Joe Moyer.
At 11:33 last night, Winston Peters posted on social media that in the next 48 hours he would be answering questions via a Facebook Live to tell people the truth about the New Zealand First Foundation. "Get your questions in now," he wrote. Mr Peters, who is also the racing minister, wasn't interested in answering questions about donations from the racing industry on his way into the House today. But he did end the suspense over whether his promise to reveal all was serious.
Do you think there's any public perception issues around the fact that you're receiving large amounts of money from the racing industry as racing minister?
At 6:30 tonight on my Facebook, you'll have your answers.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she isn't fazed about the donations her coalition partner receives from the racing industry, and she's never asked Mr Peters to disclose the details.
Racing policy, decisions, bills, as with any decision we make as a government, go through considerable scrutiny. No one policy is ever decided by one party. They go through all of us, and in this case have gone before the House and received support from across the House.
She says at times Mr Peters has gone against the racing industry's wishes, and some of the accusations against him are unfair.
This was an industry that was struggling. The minister's seeking to revive it. Some of it has meant very hard calls that even some of the industry don't like.
But National's finance spokesperson, Paul Goldsmith, says New Zealand First cozying up to the racing industry has gone too far. He's demanding an audit of all funding decisions made by New Zealand First ministers following the latest donation revelations.
All New Zealanders want to be assured about the integrity of the decision making. To reassure New Zealanders, the Minister of Finance should insist that we go back and review those decisions.
Senior New Zealand First MP Shane Jones, who is also the Regional Economic Development and Forestry Minister, has labelled the whole saga a nasty witch hunt. He says the SFO process will reveal there's nothing wrong with the foundation or how it operates. Asked at Waitangi whether the racing industry was getting a quid pro quo, this was his response.
No, I think that's really petty to talk like that. I've been a recipient of Sea Lords and the Dalmatian leadership in terms of fisheries, and I resent any suggestion that decisions or statements that I make about fisheries are driven because of donations. Those donations are within the law.
Back in 2008, Mr Peters faced a donation scandal that threw New Zealand First into political exile. Now faced with similar circumstances, Mr Peters has changed his approach, firstly by being more conciliatory and ordering the party to review its donations. Secondly, he's found a way to control the messaging by sidestepping the press gallery and speaking directly to voters through his own social media. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
Tauranga's mayor says people are angry and scared after 2 people were found dead at a house in a rural area near the popular McLaren Falls. A homicide investigation has been launched, but the police won't say whether the incident is gang-related. However, the mayor, Tembi Powell, says the latest violence comes amid increasing gang activity in recent weeks. Our reporter Sarah Robson has more.
The police say they were called to a house in the Whanau Ora area just after 7:30 last night, after reports of shots being fired. When the police arrived, they found the 2 men dead. A scene examination was being carried out at the property today as they pieced together what happened. Tauranga's mayor, Tembi Powell, says he's been getting regular updates from detectives. He's also been hearing from people in the community.
This is very disturbing to all of us. I'm drowning in messages of all sorts, texts, Facebook messages from deeply concerned residents who, if I can use 2 words really to capture the essence of their communiques, one is fear and the other is anger.
Tembi Powell says people are scared. While the police haven't yet confirmed any gang links in this incident, he says he's concerned about the recent escalation of gang activity in Bay of Plenty.
You know, we're seeing some very violent acts now, and it's only really, as I've said before, a matter of time before a resident, an innocent, if you will, is caught up in the collateral damage of these activities.
Tembi Powell wants to meet with people from across the community to talk about it.
It's time to, get everybody together, including residents of Tauranga, iwi, very importantly, because they've got some very strong views on this. The government, and not just the police, but other agencies as well, together with our police here locally, who are doing an absolutely incredible job.
The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, is trying to reassure locals.
Police are up there, they'll see armed police in their neighbourhood, take it as a sign of confidence. I do not think the Mayor should be as overt as he is, saying that people are angry. Police are on the task.
The police have not yet confirmed whether there is an active manhunt underway to find those responsible for last night's shooting. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The World Health Organization says countries need to fight the coronavirus outbreak with aggression and in unison. The WHO has come up with a name for the deadly virus, COVID-19, and warns it could be 18 months before a vaccine is found. The death toll exceeds 1,000 now, and there are confirmed cases in 24 countries. Experts have been gathering in Geneva to determine how to stop the hugely worrying spread. The ABC's Thomas Oriti reports.
For health authorities around the world, a lot's changed in a short time.
It's hard to believe that just 2 months ago, this virus, which has come to captivate the attention of media, financial markets and political leaders, was completely unknown to us.
The Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, is meeting with 400 experts in Geneva, and it comes as the death toll climbs past 1,000.
And if the world doesn't want to wake up and consider this virus as public enemy number 1, I don't think we will learn from our lessons.
It's infected more than 40,000 people in countries around the world, but until now it's only been widely known as the coronavirus, which refers to a group of viruses. So now there's a new name, COVID-19, which might sound technical, but it's actually not. The letters are an amalgam of coronavirus disease, and it was discovered in 2019.
We had to find a name that did not refer to a geographical location, an animal, an individual or group of people, and which is also pronounceable and related to the disease.
But this is more than a meeting about a new name for the virus. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has warned that a virus is more powerful in creating political, social and economic upheaval than any terrorist attack, adding that it's the worst enemy you can imagine.
It's a test of political solidarity whether the world can come together to fight a common enemy that does not respect borders or ideologies.
And it's a test of scientific solidarity. He says there's a lot we still don't know, and it could be 18 months before we see a vaccine. Concerns shared by Dr. Anne Sushat from the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
We think that in many respects, the spread of the virus is through respiratory droplets, similar to what we see with seasonal influenza, but we don't have as much information as we would like about the severity of the virus.
In the meantime, work's continuing to contain it, including on the Diamond Princess cruise ship in Japan.
And that's Thomas Oriti reporting. Another wave of passengers infected with coronavirus are being offloaded from the Diamond Princess cruise ship that's docked in quarantine in Yokohama. The rest of the 3,700 passengers confined to their cabins are a week into a fortnight-long isolation. Food's being dropped outside their doors and people in internal cabins are allowed onto the deck for extremely limited amounts of time. Last time we talked to American Matthew Smith, who was on board, he was hoping to get a change of bed sheets and was feeling extremely lucky to have a balcony on his cabin. Today, when we spoke, the ship's captain had just announced another 39 passengers have tested positive for the virus. I asked Matthew if he's feeling like a sitting duck.
You know, my feelings are kind of mixed. They've been telling us despite some initial misinformation, it seems what we got from the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo was that the World Health Organization and the Japanese health officials were on board with the idea of once we complete the 14 days and you haven't been either diagnosed or are not closely associated with someone diagnosed, that you'll be able to leave and return. And we've told that we wouldn't have to do an additional quarantine upon return to the U.S. My only concern at this point is we keep finding more people, and there's always just this tenor of near panic out there and hysteria that I don't know whether it's the uncertainty of not knowing whether they're going to hold to that as a new batch of 38 cases comes out. Are they going to decide, well, no, we have to do something else and you're going to have to stay on there longer? So it's just that uncertainty that we don't have a firm commitment yet as far as a release date.
So, Matthew, obviously, in terms of the quarantine period, you've got a week to go, but your fear is that someone will say, no, you have to stay longer or you're going into another quarantine.
Right. It's more that I would imagine they would say you have to stay longer, that they're not going to move us off the ship because, if you're thinking these people might be infected, the idea of trying to move a population of over 3,600 that's just guests to somewhere else, it seems to me would be logistically impossible. I guess I thought the most likely scenario, if it wasn't going to pan out, was that we'd seen in the news that the Japanese officials were discussing whether everyone should be tested before they're allowed out of quarantine, which wouldn't be a problem except that then you're talking about 3,600 plus throat swabs that have to be tested at a laboratory, and it sounded to me like it would be logistically difficult for them to get enough laboratories to work on that without extending the quarantine. So that focuses down to my most likely fear. And again, I don't have any reason to think it is going to happen, just possible that they would say, well, we're going to come swab your throat, but it's going to take us, a week to get all these tests done, so you're going to have to stay.
In terms of the people who are being taken off the ship, the most recently diagnosed people, do you know who they are and whether you have had any contact with them?
No, and I think, unless people are in communicating with each other and we're some sort of gossip chain or we're in contact with the people being taken off or saw it on the news, there's no way for us to really know. We docked back in the pier this morning, and the captain said for operational reasons and for passenger reasons, he turned the ship around this time. So instead of facing the bay, we're facing the pier, and we'll be able to see the disembarkation process. But from what I've seen on the news, they have it all covered, and there's no way to see who they are. The Japanese keep the names confidential, and all you end up learning is the nationality and ages, basically. And we don't know anybody else on the ship, so no way of knowing if anybody that.
Are you communicating with other passengers, Matthew, in any way?
No, because we have a large balcony, we're not among those that are rotated out onto the decks. We can, if you go out on the balcony, you can see the people above who are out on their balconies at the edge. You can see the people below, but I actually don't want to engage with anyone, because to me the idea was, okay, it's a quarantine and you need to, stay in your cabin and keep separate from anyone. So we don't really want to get into even partial close contact with the people outside. So we haven't communicated with any of them. Some people do. Some people stand out on the balconies and talk to each other, but I think I like the isolation because that's what makes the quarantine effective.
What are you missing?
Well, I'll tell you what my wife is missing, because it's more interesting than I hadn't really thought about it, but she said she's missing tacos because we've been gone for a month now, and we're like back to home, back to some familiar foods and things that we enjoy, and our 2 cats.
Have you managed to get clean sheets yet?
Yes. In fact, I just made the bed with new linens this morning, and that's our second change since we got stuck in the cabin.
Small victories. Hey, do you know how you will get home once you are released?
Well, based on what we're informed by the embassy, that we can travel on commercial flights and there's no further quarantine. We have a pending reservation which based on the hope and belief that we'll get off on the 19th. Our plan is to spend a couple more days in Tokyo and then fly back on a commercial flight.
So you're basically still keen to have a look around after you get off the ship? You're not going to head straight home immediately?
No, it's kind of like having this decompression period before, traveling off. And I think of it now that I think it's like, okay, we've been stuck in this cabin, and do I really want to rush down to the airport and be stuck inside a plane for 11 hours or what it is? It's rather get a hotel room and just try and relax and, quietly move around and then go home.
And that's Matthew Smith, one of the passengers stuck on the Diamond Princess. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, where is the money earmarked for Whanau Ora really going? A deal to remove potentially toxic waste from an old paper mill in Matoda falls through. And the animals most affected by the bushfire in Australia, what species are at risk? We would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email. Our address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Here's Susanna now with the headlines.
People who have returned from China since the coronavirus outbreak may be forced to isolate themselves if they haven't already done so. Nearly 2,000 people are registered as being in self-imposed quarantine, but another 4,000 who came back this month have not registered with the newly created Healthline. The Mayor of Gore is upset that a deal reached with New Zealand aluminium smelters to remove potentially hazardous waste has fallen through. The dross from Tiwai Point smelter is stored in a former paper mill on the banks of the Matoda River and risked releasing ammonia gas during last week's flooding. The Gore District Council says Rio Tinto bosses in Australia have reneged on the agreement to take the waste away. The Ministry for Children will not discuss the case of a 4-year-old boy who suffered severe injuries and brain damage in Flexmere 2 weeks ago, beyond saying the child's injuries are extremely disturbing. The boy was hurt while staying with extended family, and the police are pleading with family members to explain what happened. Radio New Zealand has withdrawn a proposal to restructure RNZ Concert. Last week, the broadcaster announced it planned to remove Concert from its FM frequencies and automate it, and use the FM frequency for a new youth station. Chief Executive Paul Thompson says he told Music Department staff this afternoon he is withdrawing the proposal. He says things have changed now that the government has indicated it will support a new youth music service. The Tauranga Mayor says locals are scared and angry that 2 men have been found dead at a house in a rural area near McLaren Falls. A homicide investigation has been launched, but the police won't say whether the incident is gang-related. Mayor Tenby Powell says he's been getting regular updates from the police and also a lot of messages from worried locals. Firefighters in Christchurch have used helicopters with monsoon buckets to contain a scrub fire burning near the highway leading to Littleton Tunnel. The blaze on the Heathcote riverbank jumped the river in gusty winds, forcing the closure of Tunnel Road. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks.
Paracetamol, take yourself off to bed, keep up the fluids, get lots of rest, and if you're not feeling better in a couple of months, then give me a call. Because essentially they're saying they think that it will be short, it will be possibly sharp for some people, but it won't last, and the effects probably will be felt in different ways by different sectors. Now, we know about tourism, travel, some education sector, some disruption to food exports and that sort of thing, but they don't think that will last. And so, from that point of view, any thoughts of cutting the official cash rate to try and insulate, should we say, inoculate the economy with lower interest rates didn't really seem to come into their thinking. Remembering that it takes a good 9 to 12 months for any interest rate to work its way through the economy anyway. So by the time you actually start to feel the effects, everything has changed since then. So they're still thinking, though, that we will take a short-term hit. They have in their growth forecast for the first 3 months of this year, so that will be the 3 months to the end of March, they've nearly halved their growth forecast by 0.3%. Now, I've done some very rough calculations on the back of an envelope. By my thinking, that's about a hit of just under $1 billion for the economy during that period. So we would have grown more if we hadn't had the virus. Here's the Governor, Adrian Orr.
So we are looking at around, I would say, a 6-week hiatus disruption. You know, the working assumption is that travel bans are lifted and there's some renormalisation over the month of March, with some lingering effects. So that is a working assumption. How much would we need to respond? That's going to be a function of what we're responding to. And without doubt, monetary policy would only be part of any response. There is ongoing response already through traditional automatic stabilisers from government transfer payments, IRD efforts. There's a whole of government type of response that can go on. The monetary policy response would be a bit player in that.
So, of course, time will tell whether he's right or not. But I'm guessing it will need a significant global escalation, and this will need to become a global pandemic with real serious worldwide consequences for the global economy before the Reserve Bank starts to contemplate whether it needs to cut rates. And I think from that point of view, it's just it will be roughly business as usual. As Adrian Orr likes to often say, we'll just keep watching, waiting and worrying.
So, OK, no cuts. Generally speaking, then you touched on it, but the outlook, what are we expecting?
Well, they're reasonably upbeat. Clearly, they feel that the interest rate cuts from last year, and if you remember, they cut by 0.75 of a percentage point in two bites, taking the cash rate down to 1%. They've seen that flow through to the housing market. They're looking at the employment market. They're seeing that that's solid. Of course, one of their jobs from government is to maximise employment. And they say, well, we're doing that, possibly doing it a little bit more. They look at inflation, and of course, they see it now in the sort of Goldilocks zone, which is there or thereabouts their 2% target. So their economic forecasts are reasonably upbeat. They say it will take time. There are going to be a few shocks here and there. For instance, there's a potential for drought in some parts of the country. We'll wait and see on that one as well. But all all in all, their forecasts are pointing to growth of around 3% towards the end of the year going into next year. And if that transpires as they think, and of course there's the government stimulus package that's yet to take effect as well, they're thinking that they may start raising interest rates, and we haven't seen that in a year or 5. They may start raising interest rates towards the end of next year going into 2022.
Interesting. Hey, can you just give us a bit of an overview? Sky TV's result today, not, well, as rosy as they would probably like?
Well, no, they took a hit, and we always knew that they would take a hit. Barely made $12 million, I think, or very close to it for their profit for the half year, compared with nearly $60 million last year. The point being that they're a business in transition. They spent close to $300 million buying Neon, the rugby pass business, transforming other bits of their business. The problem for them is that while they're doing this, they're still losing money on their old-fashioned satellite service. The money that they're losing is bigger than the money that they're gaining from the new services, even though they've managed to slow down the number of people who are disconnecting. So from that point of view, Sky TV, it's saving its money, so there's no dividend to be paid to shareholders. There's more to come as they transform themselves more into a streaming-based service and provider of sports and the like. Remembering, they've got to pay for those rugby rights because they paid well over the odds for the Sanzar rights for the next few years. They're still battling the likes of Spark Sport and all the other people who are out there. This is a business that I think it won't sprint. It will walk slowly, and at times it will look like it's limping towards the future. But under new leadership, they seem to have at least turned the corner, if nothing else.
So where did the numbers end up at the end of the day?
Our top 50 index up 64 points. That's about 0.5%, 11,900, well, within a smidgen of it. And that's only a couple of 100 points shy of record territory. So for all the nerves and volatility out there, the market's still doing reasonably well. It was, of course, buoyed by the Reserve Bank statement with no rate change. Good for shares. That gave the Kiwi dollar a shot in the arm as well. We gained nearly 0.5% against the US dollar, just touching 64.6 US cents, 96 Australian, and just over 50 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. That's Giles Beckford, our business editor. They let him out late today with our business news update and all the numbers. You may remember our reporting last week on almost 10 tonnes of hazardous waste from TY Point's aluminium smelter, so-called Uvia premix, that was at risk from the flooding in Southland. Gore District Council had said they'd managed to reach a handshake deal to get it moved from Matoda to TY Point, but now that agreement has been overruled by Rio Tinto. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
As the floodwaters rose around Matoda last Wednesday, widespread evacuations were ordered. Many residents believe it was due to the threat of water mixing with the Uvia premix and letting off a cloud of ammonia gas. Late last week, Gore District Council's Chief Executive, Steve Perry, announced plans to move the dross from the mothballed paper mill in the town. But today, he's not so happy.
It was agreed by the 3 people in that room, including Stuart Hamilton, that I would make the statements that I did. And we went through the points. And it was agreed in the public interest that we should make a statement as opposed to saying we're in negotiation and there's no details we can give you.
Rio Tinto owns a majority stake in the smelter at TY Point. And Steve Perry says he's devastated the agreement, which he claims they verbally made, has fallen through.
Quite keen to get that dross out of there. It's a very big concern to the community in Mataura. So to find that you've been put to the post by superiors who don't see the need to act with urgency and don't see the need for them to get further involved in providing a solution is, devastating and very disappointing.
The Chief Executive of New Zealand Aluminium Smelters, Stuart Hamilton, wasn't available for an interview today, but in a statement said they had fully cooperated with the Gore District Council in removing material from Matoda and committed $1.75 million to the process. The statement did not address whether a handshake deal was agreed or if anything would be done to expedite the removal of the dross following last week's floods. The dross was moved into Matoda's disused paper mill, as well as other sites around Southland, by Taha Industries in 2014. That company went into liquidation in 2016, and the dross sat in the factory until a deal was cut last year between the government and local councils to move the product over 6 years. Gore District Mayor Tracy Hicks is gutted at what's transpired.
It's something that came from their place. It was being processed by their contractors. Their contractors left it in the site it's in now and left us literally in the lurch and not knowing what to do with it. Nobody seemed to want to take responsibility. We've had to dig our hands in our pockets on behalf of ratepayers and residents, and just needs to be gone sooner rather than later.
Sort Out the Dross Action Group spokesperson Cherie Chapman is also angry at Rio Tinto.
That community has had a gutful of that dross being a risk to their health, and there are so many anecdotes about people who are getting sick, people who have worked with it and getting sick, and fear about what would happen if it got into the river.
Steve Parry says last week's flooding demonstrated the risk the waste presented.
Every time we get a flood warning, you brace yourself. You know, it's a prime risk. We know that. And it was deeply worrying as we tried to plan our reaction to the rising flood waters and the scenarios running through your mind as what might happen. So, we all want the stuff gone. And one of the misconceptions out there is that somehow the council agreed to get it, for the stuff to be put in there in the first place. Not at all. It was put in there in the dead of night unlawfully by a company that's since gone into liquidation, and the culprits took off to Bahrain.
Sort Out the Dross is holding a community meeting in Matoda on Friday night. Mr Parry says someone linked to the smelter needs to front up and explain the situation to locals. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Te Puni Kōkiri has confirmed to Māori MPs that money earmarked for Whanau Ora services does sit with other government agencies. It backs up concerns held by prominent Māori claimants, including Dame Tariana Turia, Dame Iritana Tawhiwhirangi and Meripeka Raukawa Tate, who met with the Prime Minister last night. The claimants have taken a case to the Waitangi Tribunal over concerns that new funding for Whanau Ora services is being directed to government-led projects. But Whanau Ora Minister Pene Henare says it's just a case of miscommunication. Our Māori News correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
They're being dubbed the Dames. 5 high-profile Māori leaders have laid down a challenge to the government, upset that new Whanau Ora funding is being directed to government agencies. Last night, they met with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to talk it out. A claimant and Whanau Ora commissioning agency boss, Meripeka Raukawa Tate, says it went well.
It was a full and frank discussion, there was no doubt about that, and we just said that we can do more, but we need the support from the government, and we need to know that the government does value the work that we do, and if that is the case, then fund us to do more, because we have to do more. There are families living in crisis in this country. It is getting worse.
Back in May last year, Whanau Ora got a massive funding boost of $80 million over 4 years. But problems arose when the 3 agencies who commission Whanau Ora services realised they were only allocated $10 million of that so far. About $12 million was set to go to Te Puni Kōkiri to manage and expand Whanau Ora. On top of the $80 million, an extra $35 million was secured for corrections to trial a Whanau Ora service for families of inmates. That's been the crux of the complaint. Dame Tariana Turia, who created the policy when she co-led the Māori Party, says money earmarked for a Whanau Ora approach should go to the commissioning agencies.
It's the only policy in government which is successful for Māori people. Now, why wouldn't you continue to fund it, and certainly fund it at a level where Māori are able to make a difference for themselves?
Coincidentally, today, Te Puni Kōkiri reported back to the Māori Affairs Select Committee in Parliament. Its Chief Executive, David Samuels, acknowledged that the main commissioning agencies would not be in charge of all the Whanau Ora funding. He says so far about $2 million has been set aside for localised commissioning agencies, and some money for Whanau Ora will sit within other government agencies.
With regards to other money in Whanau Ora, some of that has gone to other agencies to deliver on Whanau Ora, and that is being developed. And that's because the core function that money is designed to support resides in those agencies.
However, the Whanau Ora Minister Peeni Henare rejects that the money is going back to government. He has defended the new spend on Te Puni Kōkiri, saying the extra administration is needed because the funding pool has grown. And he says the Corrections Hall partly came out of their own budget, but it is not necessarily out of reach for the commissioning agencies.
The partnership with Corrections allows us in the Whanau Ora space to actually work in the correction space where we've never been ever before. So those who provide that service will be NGOs, Whanau Ora providers. Why wouldn't they be a part of that? And we've never ever said that Corrections will be either administering or holding that money.
A spokesperson for Jacinda Ardern says it was a constructive meeting last night and the group committed to work together to ensure the strongest possible future for Whanau Ora. But the Dames say their Waitangi Tribunal claim is still on the table. Another claimant, Dame Iritana Tāpipirangi, says while nothing was landed on, it was a promising start.
There's a lot of steps to be taken to consider by us and by her and the government. So at least, she was listening and we were listening to her. By sitting together and listening to each other, rather than sort of, turning our backs or the government turning their backs on us. No, it was a very sort of helpful meeting, both, I think, for her and for us.
It's now up to Minister Henare to work with the claimants over the next steps. For Checkpoint, I'm Lee Martimer McLaughlin.
It is about 10 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's been a big night for Senator Bernie Sanders and a bad night for former Vice President Joe Biden in the New Hampshire primary. It's the second leg of the race to choose a candidate to take on President Trump in November. Bernie Sanders, who won New Hampshire in a landslide against Hillary Clinton last time around, has again had a strong showing, but this time his margin of victory is much tighter.
Let me say tonight that this victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump. With victories behind us, popular vote in Iowa and the victory here tonight, we're going to Nevada, we're going to South Carolina, we're going to win those states as well.
Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the youngest candidate in the race and the first openly gay presidential candidate, is only narrowly behind in second. And there's been a big surge for moderate Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is in third place. But things are not looking good for Joe Biden. He pitched himself as the electable candidate. The voters in New Hampshire appear not to agree with that. He's back in fifth place and left the state before the results even started coming in. The former vice president is in South Carolina, where there's a big African-American vote he will be relying on. He seemed to forget which state has just voted, but struck up an upbeat tone to his supporters.
It is important that Iowa and Nevada have spoken, but look, we need to hear from Nevada and South Carolina and Super Tuesday states and beyond. And look, we're moving in an especially important phase, because up till now, we haven't heard from the most committed constituency of the Democratic Party, the African-American community. And the fastest growing segment of society, the Latino community. I want you all to think of a number, 99.9%. That's the percentage of African-American voters who have not yet had a chance to vote in America. One more number. 99.8. That's the percent of Latino voters who haven't had a chance to vote. So when you hear all these pundits and experts, cable TV talkers talked about the race, tell them it ain't over, man. We're just getting started.
That was Joe Biden, and here's the BBC's John Sopel with more from New Hampshire.
I think what we've seen tonight is that Bernie Sanders is run away far out ahead of Elizabeth Warren, who is seen to be the other progressive/liberal/left-wing, make your own choice, what epithet you want to attach to them. So Bernie Sanders is the choice from that wing of the party. It's still open who is going to emerge as the more centrist. A few weeks ago, we thought it would be Joe Biden. Joe Biden is sinking like a stone. It's between Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg and we'll see who's got the longevity going into Nevada, going into South Carolina. Bernie Sanders supporters will be very happy that their man has won, that he's come through, that he's won in New Hampshire again. But this race has still got a long way to go. I know it's an old cliche, but it's true.
John Sopel there in New Hampshire. The transitional government in Sudan has agreed to hand over the former president Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. He's wanted for crimes against humanity and genocide in the Western Darfur region, along with 3 other people. The conflict cost the lives of around 300,000 people. The commitment came about at a peace talks between Sudan's government and rebel groups from the Darfur region.
We have agreed on the appearance of those who face arrest warrants before the International Criminal Court. I'm saying this very clearly. We cannot achieve justice unless we heal the wound using justice itself. We cannot run away from facing those who have committed crimes against humanity and war crimes against innocent people in Darfur and in other places.
Omar al-Bashir denies the allegations against him. The BBC's Anne Soy says his ability to avoid the charges started to diminish after he was driven from power last year.
It is a huge development for Sudan and for the people of Darfur. The announcement was made in the morning by the spokesperson of the Transitional Military Council, basically the council that is currently running Sudan. He was in Juba when he made that announcement, saying that he had reached that agreement and they would be handing over Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. Now, it's been a long time coming. Omar al-Bashir was indicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity, including genocide in the Darfur, crimes that were committed between 2003 and around 2010. There were 2 arrest warrants against him by the International Criminal Court issued in 2009 and 2010, but they were largely ignored. He continued to travel across Africa and the Middle East. Countries that are members of the ICC did not hand him over. In some cases, the governments were taken to court, to their local courts in their countries, but still, until now, there hasn't been any willingness to hand him over to the ICC, and that's why this is a major development.
Anne Soy reporting. More than 100 native animals have been identified as those in most urgent need of help following the bushfires in Australia. An expert panel has compiled the list for the federal government in an attempt to help it salvage what animal populations have survived. The panel has found there have been no extinctions due to the bushfires yet, but it's warned time is critical. The ABC's Alexandra Beach reports.
Sam Mitchell says the flow of burned and injured koalas out of the Kangaroo Island bushfires is finally starting to slow.
We're still seeing anywhere from 5 to 10 new arrivals each day, which has slowed down a lot from our biggest day of new arrivals was 68.
The owner of the Kangaroo Island Wildlife Park has set up a makeshift hospital to treat wildlife, but he'd pretty much given up hope that some species would survive, like the Kangaroo Island dunnart.
Initially, I just assumed, and as did a few other people, that they were being completely wiped out because it's only a small isolated pocket on the island.
There have been recent sightings of the small mouse-like creature, but its survival is far from certain. It's been placed at the top of a list of animals most in need of help following this summer's bushfires.
It shelters in the skirts of grass trees and it's had more than 95% of its known distribution burnt. So this is a species that we're really very worried about.
Sally Box is the federal government's Threatened Species Commissioner. She's been working with an expert panel to find out which native species were in the path of the fires and how vulnerable they are now.
There have been some species that were not previously listed as threatened. They were not in peril before the fire, but it looks like they may have been quite severely impacted. Species like the superb lyrebird and the Palmer wallaby.
At this point, they haven't identified any extinctions, but many areas are still too unsafe for proper on-the-ground assessments. The recent downpour could also present a further threat.
So fish species, for example, that are living far downstream of the fire event can be very severely impacted if heavy rain washes down a load of sediment and ash, and a big sediment load can cause a mass fish kill.
The animals identified on this list will be prioritised for urgent management intervention over the next 12 months. That could include protecting remaining habitat, targeting pest species, supplementary feeding, or moving the most vulnerable species to a zoo or sanctuary. Tauranga Zoo's Michael McFadden Poseidon has been working to protect the northern corroboree frog for more than a decade. It was critically endangered before the fires, and he says setting up a captive colony is now the best option.
That will allow us to buy some time and be able to produce a lot of eggs and offspring in the future for translocation trials once the habitat is good again.
He says these frogs are used to cool temperatures in the mountains and weren't well prepared for a bushfire.
If it was a wet year and a big fire came through soon after, there's probably more hope for the frogs, whereas in a dry year when the frogs are already under environmental stresses, it's hard to know exactly what impact that will have.
The federal government has already announced $50 million for wildlife recovery and has acknowledged more money may be necessary.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia Tawa tēnei. Health authorities think it will take 2 days to track down 4,000 people who haven't registered after returning from China since the coronavirus outbreak started. Nearly 2,000 people are registered as being in self-imposed quarantine. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, told a media conference this afternoon officials may force some people to isolate themselves. He says the ministry is taking a strong approach in line with recommendations from the World Health Organization.
Over 50 tests have been done that have come back negative, and there are a number of tests at the moment that are outstanding and we're waiting for those results. I should confirm, though, that none of those tests are on people that fully fit the suspected case definition, but as ever, we are taking a precautionary approach there.
Dr. Bloomfield says the Healthline register is getting a good response. The Reserve Bank has kept the official interest rate steady at 1%, but says a cut could be necessary if the coronavirus becomes a bigger risk to the economy. The economy is expected to accelerate in the second half of the year with continuing low interest rates and government spending. However, the central bank's governor, Adrian Orr, says the coronavirus is a potential game changer.
For our decision, we assume the overall economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak in New Zealand will be of short duration. There is a risk the impact will be larger and more persistent. Monetary policy does have time to adjust if needed as more information becomes available.
Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr. And 4 cruise ships have been refused entry into Tonga over concerns about the coronavirus. Tonga's Tourism Office says the order to refuse entry came from the Director of Health. The cruise ships, with more than 3,000 passengers overall, are reported to be heading for Fiji and New Zealand waters. The New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters is promising to give the public answers on donations made to the New Zealand First Foundation by the horse racing industry. The foundation has been receiving tens of thousands of dollars from donors in the industry in payments which fall just below the $15,000 threshold, at which point party donations are usually made public. When questioned by RNZ about the donations, Winston Peters, who was also the racing minister, had this to say.
Do you think there's any public perception issues around the fact that you're receiving large amounts of money from the racing industry as racing minister?
At 6:30 tonight on my Facebook, you'll have your answers.
That was New Zealand First Leader and Racing Minister Winston Peters. Radio New Zealand has withdrawn a proposal to cut jobs and restructure RNZ Concert. Last week, RNZ announced a plan to remove Concert from its FM frequencies and automate it and use the FM frequency for a new youth station. RNZ's Chief Executive Paul Thompson says he met with staff in the music department this afternoon to withdraw the proposal.
We've listened to the feedback. It's been ferocious. The government has indicated it's open to helping us with the new service for New Zealand, young New Zealanders. So this gives us an opportunity to reset.
Paul Thompson says over the next month, RNZ will develop a new strategy for Concert aimed at improving its audience as well as working on plans for the new youth station. The water is back on in Waihi and Hauraki after staff worked through the night to fix a burst pipe which briefly left the town running dry. The reservoir was empty by this morning. Water is flowing through the taps again, but it needs to be boiled for 3 minutes. Hauraki District Mayor Toby Adams thanked people in Waihi for their patience.
I've been down here for a couple of hours now, hand delivering water bottles out to residents, and they've been nothing but happy and thankful. You know, it was just like, yep, these things happen, let's just get on with it.
The level of the Waihi Reservoir is slowly rising, but Toby Adams is asking residents to cut their showers a little bit short and hold off on the washing for a day or two. It's 4 minutes past 6. The All Black coach thinks Aaron Cruden may still have a role to play for the All Blacks this year before the first first 5 swaps at Super Rugby for Japan's top league. The 31-year-old, who returned to the Chiefs for the 2020 season and heads to Kobe later this year and has played down suggestions he could be recalled to the national side. But Ian Foster, who watched the Chiefs beat the Crusaders at the weekend, told Sky Sport he thinks Cruden is eligible for tests against Wales and Scotland in July and possibly the Rugby Championship. The New Zealand cricket skipper Kane Williamson says the injured pace bowlers Trent Boult and Lockie Ferguson are on course to be fit for the Test series against India. Both missed the T20 and one-day matches against India, but are expected to be right for the first Test in Wellington next week. The history-making New Zealand boxer Giovanna Perez will defend her WBO World Light Heavyweight title against British fighter Savannah Marshall. The Brazilian-born Perez won her world title in March last year, becoming the first New Zealander to win a major women's world title. The title fight will be in Newcastle on April the 5th. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Chris Button. We've spoken to him before about teaching kids how to survive in cold water. Question is, can they remember what to do if they're not in a swimming pool? He's got some preliminary results. And Murray Burns from My Sex, they've got the band back together for a tour of Aotearoa. Just a shame Sir Rob's not around to hear them this time. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine. Areas of cloud overnight and tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods. A few showers in Westland tomorrow. Canterbury, mainly fine. High cloud increasing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow, mainly during the afternoon about the ranges. Otago, Southland and Fiordland. Fine at first, cloudy periods about the south coast. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight. Scattered falls spreading to Southland and Clutha. Easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning, then clearing in the evening, but areas of cloud remaining. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Ministry of Health says they will be forced to take action if people who have recently returned from China don't self-isolate in response to the coronavirus outbreak. Around 4,000 people have not been registered to the newly created Healthline to say they are self-isolating. And Healthline says they're using information shared by Customs to contact those who are still outstanding. Harry Locke reports.
6,369 people have been processed manually through airline borders since February 3rd, when the travel restrictions came into action. It was enforced to help protect New Zealand against coronavirus, which has now been named COVID-19. So far, just under 2,000 have called the Healthline to register, saying they are self-isolating. The Ministry of Health has since entered into an agreement with Customs passing over personal information. The Ministry's Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says the approach is to target those who have not yet registered.
For people who haven't either taken up the opportunity or had the opportunity yet to self-register, that's exactly why we are now using the data collected at the border since the 3rd of February to proactively contact those people and get them on that register.
The Healthline was set up last Friday to be used to register those who have recently arrived from China, and they will begin calling up all those who have not registered from today. The head of the National Telehealth Service, which operates Healthline, Andrew Slater, says they have begun making calls.
We're starting contacting those people today, and we anticipate we should be able to work through that list within the next 48 hours.
Mr. Slater says they are also monitoring people who may be distressed or with particular welfare needs and calling them daily. He says to help with the effort, they've taken on extra staff.
Within the National Telehealth Service, we have over 450 staff that we're able to flex up and things. We're also reaching into some of our partner organisations to bring in some additional capacity, particularly those that speak Mandarin, to be able to connect with people.
Healthline are using information acquired from Customs, who have entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Health. Border Operations Manager Terry Brown says it's information regarding their flight booking, identification details, as well as a contact number. He says the information is all being transferred securely.
It's shared electronically. That's exclusively Ministry of Health, and that's why we've entered into a memorandum of understanding to maintain the security. But clearly that information is required for a reasonably extraordinary purpose.
On the phone, Healthline will be asking the people to self-isolate. Dr. Bloomfield says if people don't want to do so, the ministry may have to intervene.
There are powers under the Health Act to require people to self-isolate. If people are not taking the opportunity and the advice and the expectation they will self-isolate, then we would be asking who those people were from Healthline and following them up and seeing if we needed to take any further action.
3 labs across New Zealand have taken on the job of testing suspicious samples for COVID-19 in Wellington, Auckland and Christchurch. Dr Bloomfield says so far 50 samples have been tested and all will return negative. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
An American scientist is hopeful a human clinical trial in China will prove an antiviral drug originally tested on Ebola will work against coronavirus. Chinese media is reporting more than 700 patients with the virus are now part of a randomised trial where 2/3 of the participants will receive the drug, remdesivir, while others will just get standard treatments. Neither the doctors or the patients will know who has received the drug until after the trial. Dr Tim Sheehan is a professor of epidemiology at the Gillings School of Global Public Health in South Carolina. He spent the last 5 years in the lab testing remdesivir against other coronaviruses like MERS and SARS with good results, and that's prompted the leap to human trials following this new outbreak. I asked him how a drug developed for Ebola works to destroy these types of viruses.
Viruses are parasites, so they have to use some of our machinery in our body to replicate themselves. And so what viruses do is they use the building blocks inside of our cells to create, to replicate new viruses. And what remdesivir does is basically stop that process. So it's kind of like a Trojan horse where it gums up the works of the virus using our building blocks, and it ends up making defective copies of itself that don't work.
So if it showed some promise, what are the next steps or the information that's required to make best use of it?
So the next step would be a human clinical trial, and that's what is happening right now in China. So it's something I never thought would ever happen in my lifetime, where something that I have done in the lab goes on to be tested in a person. But the work that we've done kind of set this drug up to be used for situations such as this. So they are now enrolling patients, and they're using this drug in a randomized control trial in China, where the most cases are.
Is it unusual for things to move that quickly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess normally there's a process that doesn't have a sense of urgency attached to it, where you can test a drug in patients, and it doesn't have the same urgency associated with it as this does now. But I think for emerging viruses like this new coronavirus, where there aren't existing therapies, they're trying to move this as fast as possible to figure out if this can be used not only in the people in the trial, but people after that if it proves to be effective.
So realistically, how long would it take before you have the results of a study like the one that they're carrying out in China?
That's hard for me to predict. I'm not working directly with the clinicians that are doing the work, but I would imagine that they'll have some insight into whether it works or not in weeks to months.
So what was this drug originally made for?
That's a great question. The drug has been tested in people with Ebola. So it's a really interesting drug because it's a broad spectrum antiviral. So it works not only against coronavirus, it works against Ebola virus and other viruses that make people sick, like RSV, which makes babies and the elderly really sick, and some other really crazy things that are found in bats in the Indian subcontinent called Nipah and Hendra virus, and they cause really severe disease and death in people as well.
So before this study that's currently underway, was it used to specifically treat viruses like SARS before in humans?
No. So this is the first time that remdesivir has been used in humans to treat coronavirus.
Well, how much confidence do you have in this being a treatment?
I'm pretty confident. I have firsthand working knowledge with this drug, so as far as the things that I've tested so far, this is the best thing that I've seen for coronavirus. So, so I'm hopeful that it will work, but it's hard to say until the data comes out of these trials whether it's working or not.
Could there be any particular risks with testing it on so many people in this trial?
So it's gone through like safety testing in people. So I don't think there's a risk of the people taking the medication itself. But you know, things do happen as drugs are tested in people. You know, everyone's different, so drugs might behave differently in me than they would in you. But I think the very basic testing that you need to use medications like this in people has been done. So it's not like it's a completely experimental thing that that hasn't jumped through these hoops, basically.
So just to be clear, it would be a treatment rather than something you take as a preemptive strike.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So I could see this being used in two different ways. So it could be used in patients who are sick to try and save their lives or lessen their symptoms or make their disease shorter. But I could see, like, if you have healthcare workers getting sick in a hospital setting, I could see it getting used for healthcare workers, nurses, and doctors to try and limit the spread in those people who are taking care of the sick people.
So if coronavirus came to your neighbourhood, your building, would you take it? Yeah, would you take it as a preemptive medication?
I would have no hesitation taking it if things got that bad. But yeah, it's hard to say where this is going to go, if it's going to be a pandemic or not.
Just one other thing before you go. There is obviously reports of HIV drugs being trialled as treatments. Is there any suggestion that they have some value?
I would be surprised if that turned out to be true. And like the trial that is ongoing in China for remdesivir, there are also several clinical trials testing all different medications for this coronavirus, one of which being these HIV drugs that have been in the news. I have personal experience testing these HIV drugs against coronavirus, and they don't work as well as you would want them to work, definitely not as well as remdesivir. So I have low expectations for that stuff working. You know, these HIV drugs are made to be specific for HIV. And so when you take a medication like that that's very specific and really potent against one virus and you try and use it for another virus, the likelihood of that working is low unless they're really similar genetically. And they're not. Like HIV and coronavirus are not similar.
And that's Dr. Tim Sheehan. Meanwhile, in the British seaside town of Brighton, a businessman who is thought to have infected 11 people is recovering. Steve Walsh remains quarantined in hospital and says his thoughts are with the others who have contracted the virus. His story shows how quickly and easy the virus can spread. The BBC's Catherine Burns reports.
Steve Walsh is still in hospital but says it's just a precaution now. But Brighton is dealing with the after effects of his infection, with 2 GP surgeries being closed to patients. Today, Mr. Walsh has been named and has explained that he followed official advice. He says at first he self-isolated at home and then was taken to a special unit in hospital. But in the roughly 2 weeks between being infected and diagnosed, it was life as normal, including a trip to the pub. It's still open. 5 staff have gone into isolation, but the pub says it's worked with Public Health England and that there's a minimal ongoing risk of infection. Mr. Walsh picked up the coronavirus at a conference in Singapore. On his way back to the UK, he stopped off for several days at a ski chalet in France, where he passed the virus on to 11 other people. 5 of those infected remain in France and 1 man returned to Mallorca. Mr Walsh and the other 5 British people came back to the UK. 2 of them are GPs and 2 surgeries have been temporarily closed. Mr Walsh's neighbours are baffled by all the attention.
His wife's told me on the phone that really he's not that ill. She thinks it's basically a load of rubbish, and that, it's no worse than flu, probably not as bad.
It's just 5 days now since Steve Walsh was officially diagnosed, and he says he's well recovered. That is generally true for this virus. Most people tend to only get mild symptoms.
And that was Catherine Burns reporting. It is almost 6:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. More than 300 people have been injured in Beirut as protesters tried to stop a vote of confidence in Lebanon's new government. Security forces had to use tear gas and water cannon to force back protesters who are furious at the nation's worsening economic crisis. The vote has passed despite the fierce opposition from those on the streets. The ABC's Adam Harvey reports.
MPs had to run a gauntlet of stone-throwing protesters just to get to Lebanon's parliament building, which is now at the centre of a fortress of concrete barricades and razor wire. The Lebanese army has been deployed to protect MPs, positioning heavy machine guns opposite groups of unarmed but extremely angry protesters.
We came today to say no confidence to this government. We don't want this government to be in charge because we don't trust them.
They say Lebanon's new government is just as bad as the one forced out in October. Hundreds of protesters spread themselves around the city's downtown area to try to block all routes in. Soldiers and police forced them back with water cannon and tear gas rounds. At one roadblock, one round made a direct hit on protester Rama Fakhouri.
So I came down to say that we don't give confidence, a vote of confidence to this government, because this government is the same people who brought this country into this misery. I just want a better future for myself and my children. That's all I'm asking for, a dignified life.
The plastic projectile was still embedded in her sign, which read, "No trust." The round scorched her scarf and tore her winter jacket.
And I was hit directly with a tear gas round. I was saved by the cardboard, my scarf and my...
Your bulletproof vest.
Yes.
Her husband, Amer, said there's a sense of collective guilt at what's happened here.
We, as people who have survived the Civil War, we're the generation of the Civil War, we did not secure a better future for our children.
Lebanon's economy is a wreck, crushed by debt. Graduates must leave to find jobs, and people's savings are now locked in banks that fear a run on cash deposits. Amer Fakhouri says the militias that emerged from the nation's long civil war turned into the political parties that have run the country into the ground.
For 30 years we've been oppressed by those warlords. They're all warlords. Nothing more, nothing less. And they pretend to be civilized and understanding.
Democratic.
They have robbed the country. They robbed the country purely and simply.
And you're putting your bodies on the line today.
Yes, because we've had enough. We can't stay silent anymore. We stood silent for a very long time, and we cannot stay silent anymore. It's impossible. The same people who got us here cannot be the people who are going to save this country. We need new faces. We need young faces. We have, us Lebanese, we have people who have a lot of talent and experience and know they can get this country back on its feet.
That report from the ABC's Adam Harvey. A regional park north of Auckland is almost doubling in size, giving outdoorsy types a whole lot more recreational access to the coast. The city's council has bought almost 100 hectares of private land to add to the Mahurangi East Regional Park. Louise Tanuth reports.
About an hour and a half north of Auckland CBD is the Mahurangi East Regional Park. Previously, the land was only reachable by sea, but now it will join the existing park, spanning nearly 200 hectares. For a cool $12 million, Aucklanders gain access to the bays, inlets and peninsula of the Mahurangi Harbour. The John and Margaret Turnbull Family Trust stumped up almost half of that, and the rest was purchased by council. Mace Ward, the General Manager of Parks, Sport and Recreation at Auckland Council, says the new land will reap benefits.
great places for recreation and picnics and family time, walking opportunities throughout the park, opportunities for conservation, significant protection of what's iconic landscapes for North Auckland.
Mace Ward says there is still a lot of work to do to fully establish the new park.
We need to do some initial development to allow that to happen, so some car parking, toilets, so those basic amenities still need to be completed. So it may be some time, but we're a lot closer to having access for all Aucklanders to this parkland.
Auckland Council owns and manages 27 regional parks, totalling more than 40,000 hectares. Mayor Phil Goff says as the city grows, the council will invest in more open space for Aucklanders to enjoy.
I'm really proud that the council has made this investment. In fact, in the coming year, probably we'll be spending close to $50 million on new parks and public open spaces.
Phil Goff says the new park is unique.
But this is one of the biggest acquisitions for the reserves that we have in Auckland. It's not only one of the biggest, but one of the most beautiful. I think that when you stand up where we are here, you can feel really proud to be an Aucklander and to live in a place as beautiful as this.
The chance of the council gaining a park of similar size is unlikely, given its price tag and quality. Chair of Auckland Council's Parks, Arts, Culture and Events Committee, Alf Filipaina, says it's a remarkable purchase.
Beautiful water, beautiful day, beautiful landscape. This is just so cool, honestly. The house, even the house here and where it is, it just, the whole scene is just beautiful. Awesome purchase. Really is for our Aucklanders.
The privately owned parkland includes 2 quaint houses, Big Bay Batch and Vine House. The owners use those for family camping and outdoor activities. Trustee Chris Gambrill told RNZ they're delighted to ensure that this beautiful slice of the Mahurangi is protected for future generations. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tenuth aho.
The number of chinstrap penguins in some colonies in Western Antarctica has fallen by as much as 77% since they were last surveyed in the 1970s, say scientists studying the impact of climate change on the remote region. Emer McCarthy reports.
Researchers have found that a certain species of Antarctic penguin have seen a massive fall in its population. Named for its distinctive black line underneath its head, the chinstrap penguin calls the southern Pacific and Antarctic Oceans home. But some colonies in Western Antarctica have shrunk by as much as 77% since they were last surveyed in the 1970s. According to scientists from Northeastern and Stony Brook universities. They travelled on 2 Greenpeace ships earlier this year, using manual and drone surveillance to assess the damage. Reuters' Stuart McDill joined the crew.
What's happened to the chinstrap penguin colony here is echoed up and down this part of the continent. Scientists simply can't tell us why, whether it's climate change generally, warmer average temperatures, or something more specific, the food supply, the krill that they depend on perhaps. What we do know for certain is that over the last 50 years, more than half of the penguins that were here have disappeared.
Steve Forrest is a conservation biologist.
The declines that we've seen are definitely dramatic. Now, will they continue? That's the question. Are there enough krill? Does the population stabilize? There are plenty of chinstrap penguins in the world. They're not going to go immediately extinct in the next couple of decades. We've got some very large populations to the east of us in the Weddell Sea. So the issue is more, what are these particular chinstrap penguins telling us about climate change, probably, and other drivers of global ocean change in this part of the Antarctic where it's warming more dramatically than anywhere else in the Antarctic currently. 5 degrees C over the last 20 or 30 years.
Greenpeace is calling on the United Nations to commit to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, a target called for by scientists and a growing number of governments as the minimum needed to halt the damage being done by human activity.
One might say that there's a lot. Today we reached roughly around 4%, which is really, really low. But looking at that, if you turn it around, it still means that we can actively use 70% of the world's oceans. So it shouldn't be that big of a call really to protect unique places like we have here around us in Antarctica.
The UN meets from March 23rd to April 3rd to try to agree to a global ocean treaty next year.
Just before we go, a lot of you have made contact about this story regarding the 4-year-old Flexmere boy who has been badly beaten and is currently in Starship Hospital. Felicity has got in touch and says what a shambles New Zealand is in. Last week we were talking about Oranga Tamariki's brutal removal of babies from Māori mothers. Today we add a 4-year-old child to our hall of shame. This little boy joins the list with James Whakaruru, Nia Glassie and hundreds of other children who we failed to protect during the past 25 years. Please don't let this tragedy become another political football. New Zealanders need to find a way to protect vulnerable children and their families. Thanks for getting in touch, Felicity. Don't forget you can see all our stories online. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Health Ministry is contacting thousands of people who returned from China this month but haven't registered as being in isolation due to the coronavirus outbreak. The Reserve Bank says a future interest rate cut is possible if the coronavirus becomes a bigger risk to the economy. Another 39 infected people have been taken off a cruise ship quarantined in the Japanese port of Yokohama. Whanganui District Council is the latest local body to declare a climate emergency. And a scrub fire in Christchurch's eastern suburbs has been contained and the road leading to Littleton Tunnel has been reopened. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It sounds like Concert FM will be secure, but exactly in what form, that's still uncertain, and what it means for the people who work there, that's uncertain.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
That is